I first learned of Cowboy Bebop in 2021 by recommendation from a friend. At the time, I watched the first 4 episodes to get a taste of it after hearing people rave about its implementation of jazz music and great character styling. And when I first watched the show, I was visually amazed. There were compelling film noir-esque compositions, detailed characters with complementary designs, and a nostalgic frame rate. Yet, even with this appeal, I wasn't hooked. There were plenty of shows I admired for their visuals and interesting narrative, so Bebop felt somewhat ordinary, despite the time and energy it probably took to cell animate. Here's my description of the Sunrise Company production Cowboy Bebop 1998. Bebop is a moody science fiction animation that features a group of spaceship flying bounty hunters, their lives tracking bounties, and their lives in between. The show openly resembles the cyberpunk subgenre because of its futuristic dystopian setting where humans have colonized the planets of our solar system, while crime and low living are ever present. When I eventually returned to the show out of curiosity and initial interest, more recently, I was surprised to find myself growing comforted when I'd sit down to turn an episode on. Was I feeling good because I was growing connected to the characters and their personal lives? Sure. But as I watched more and more of Bebop, I realized that what I felt solace in was more so its overall setting and the thoughts it provoked in me. More specifically, I found comfort in commentaries of insignificance, the aloneness in outer space, and beginning or concluding many episodes in the same spaceship through home. Although Bebop can well speak for itself, this entry is simply my interest in discussing what I admire about the show in the ways I feel it could teach its audience about emotional response. As I watch you survive and bore, the distance between us feels less without inching forth. That is some preemptive emotional paraphrasing for what I hope this next paragraph embodies. Cowboy Bebop's characters living in their 2071 time period reminded me of an existential concept I first heard on YouTube a handful of years ago. A YouTuber mentioned they were leaving their less urban life in favor of a big city because living among a physically large and perpetually going environment made them feel less significant. Significance in this context meant ease of pressure because the world around you will continue whether you contribute to it or despite your internal pressures and failures. And I think I tie Bebop into this thought process because of the time difference between Reality's Now, 2023, and Bebop's Now, 2071. If Bebop is merely the future, what has happened in that 48-year difference is a mystery, and to be honest, the main characters we follow in Bebop could have easily slipped into the insignificance. The 48-year mystery was filled with life, we just don't know of it. Ironically, one of my favorite ways that Bebop supports this idea is probably the main reason I quit watching the show initially: episodic plots. It's strange for me to say episodic plots turned me away from Bebop, considering many of the shows I watched in my childhood, like SpongeBob SquarePants or Courage the Cowardly Dog, followed this format, but that's just kind of how it went down. The lack of a season-wide plot made me feel less inclined to watch more episodes because I felt the show didn't have much purpose for what I wanted to be sitting down to watch TV for. My thoughts about this idea have definitely changed in favor of Bebop over the years because of meta plot-related purpose, such as the commentary of insignificance. But I'm not going to say people uninterested in the show just haven't given it enough time, because ultimately, People experience TV, people pursue TV for different reasons, uniquely. Not everyone's going to want to sit down to watch a TV to think about the meta plot commentary about insignificance, you know what I mean? You know, with each episode either featuring tremendous action, like spaceship shootouts, or monotony through character boredom, like eating bland food because there's no money. Watching Cowboy Bebop feels like a safe glimpse into the lives of normal people who carry pain-ridden, love-filled, and lost paths as they maneuver their present. And that makes me appreciate living my own life, my own insignificance among the totality of others. Must we fly into outer space for its wisdom? Outer space is utilized in Cowboy Bebop as a prominent setting that provides emotional atmosphere and intensifies feelings of isolation and, by contrast, togetherness. Oftentimes we hear nothing but dialogue over the low rumble of spaceships and see emptiness surrounding us. Because Bebop features heavy action at times, the consistencies of ambient sound and implied darknesses are alluring in terms of sensory dynamics, but also because they intensify the narrative's interest in aloneness. I think this feature is what I grew most fond of over the course of watching the show, because aloneness can be a beautiful yet brutal feeling in our own lives. In the context of Cowboy Bebop, one of the ways aloneness is explored is by means of largely focusing on the past and present lives of single characters in an episode. At times, we follow withered love stories, or lovers and people with a connection, or people who had a connection, unite or reunite, for better or for worse. And by the end of many of these types of arcs, the main characters involved often fly back to their spaceship, more or less alone, leaving someone behind. Similarly, in our own lives, there are many possible instances where prioritizing our own well-being means giving up someone or a group that we once confided in. An unhealthy romantic relationship, friendships that don't or no longer reciprocate what we need, turning away a substance, etc. Moreover, in these instances of sadness, ambiguity, and maybe confusion, Cowboy Bebop introduces an element of balance and togetherness. After traveling back into space from a form of exhaustion or loss, the characters are alone with their thoughts for a moment, surrounded by darkness, silence. They are hoisted into total aloneness until they aren't alone anymore. With the four main characters and a dog sharing a spaceship, their alonenesses eventually greet one another. And I feel this is where the outer space setting shines brightest. When the characters are alone, there is nothing, and we can feel that. But when there is even one more soul, no matter if the characters have banter or an odd relationship, there is something. And I think that's something many of us can relate to. Maybe you're excited to talk about something, or you want to show your favorite person something, but if no one's around to hear you, the thoughts kind of just linger, and it's, I don't know, maybe less exciting or less validating than it could have been. Call it hope or call it obvious. Aloneness is forgetful. Isn't it lovely to come back home? I guess I never really thought to point out the element of home in TV until I watched Cowboy Bebop. Certainly, there are many shows that utilize a reoccurring setting or element as a home, like Appa the Flying Bison in Avatar The Last Airbender, or even the backyard in Phineas and Ferb. But I don't think this element is all too dissimilar between the shows. If anything, why I noticed home in Bebop among the other shows is likely a consequence of the realism and intensity in Bebop's narrative rather than the physical spaceship they actually call home in the show. Much like the flying bison in Avatar, Bebop's spaceship is a mode of transportation, a weapon, and home base. Yet, the function of a home being a setting we start or end in is still what I find most valuable in Bebop. Although I feel more of an emotional connection to returning home versus beginning at home, I don't think one is inherently more valuable than the other. There is something reassuring about returning someplace mellow after a long day. This is emphasized in Bebop because of the regular chaos that comes with futuristic bounty hunting, as you would imagine, such as shootouts over drugs, speed chases, etc. In a lot of ways, it feels similar to being out late with friends or running around till dusk, then knocking out when you get to the comfort of your home. But importantly, Bebop occasionally begins its episodes in the same setting it regularly ends in, which supports the plot's dynamics and action, pacing, and style. The show explores this support by sometimes having its characters waking up from rest or just having neutral conversation in their central spaceship. On the off episodes, this feature is offset by introductive cut-ins, where we might see the introduction of an episode's antagonist, or the occasional opening in medias res, where the main characters jump straight into the middle of a scene as the beginning. If Bebop always began its characters out and about, however, or in medias res, the audience could assume that the characters began their day at home on the spaceship, but we'd miss out on some of the instances of character quirks and mild pacing the show tends to highlight. Quirks like characters losing their patience or having banter between one another. Bebop with these inclusions makes it more stylistic and dynamic of a show. It's quite charming if you ask me. The familiarity of the show's home base does more than provide peace for its first time around audience, however. It's a reminder to those who stopped watching at some point, or to those who revisit its episodes, that there is a spaceship waiting for them if they ever return. I wasn't sure if I was going to continue watching Cowboy Bebop initially, yet alone writing an entry about it, but this surprise intrigues me. How was the once ordinary show going to expand my appreciation for emotional response through setting and implied thought? Pretty big of a task, if you ask me. I'd give it 20 minutes of my time, and in return, it showed me arousing stories that had me thinking about insignificance, aloneness in outer space, and home. Through a distant future setting in the lives of normal people, Bebop commentates feeling happily insignificant in the grand scheme of time and humanity. Our lives are simply a blip in time, which can be a reminder to not take life too seriously, which I find pretty nice, personally. In outer space, Bebop uses the absence of everything to create stark contrast between aloneness and togetherness, which lets the audience remember the value in balance and even camaraderie. Finally, home. Bebop had us returning home quite frequently to reestablish a place of security. When we've tirelessly followed the main characters fight their way through an episode, we come home knowingly safe. And if we ever choose to return to Bebop in the future, we'll be met with the same spaceship we left some moons ago. Really, I just want to say thank you to Cowboy Bebop for being a lovely example of the emotional capabilities and visual intrigue animation can offer. I enjoyed watching Cowboy Bebop tremendously and discussing points that held my attention. If you too have enjoyed watching the show once before, or even just found some interest in what I had to say, thank you for your attention, and I hope you continue staying curious and expanding your perspective. All right. Thanks for listening.